There's this great catastrophe looming. If he's extradited, Julian will lose his life. I don't think that he will survive it. He asked me in the beginning to say my relationship to him. Well, I'm his wife. Well, we became romantically involved in 2015. And he was in the embassy for 7 years. So it was very unusual circumstances to meet your partner and husband during the time that the CIA under Mike Pompeo was plotting to assassinate him.
Wow. It just seems like an entire country, potentially the most powerful country in the world, has gone after, with all of their weight, one person for like over a decade now.
There was no longer any denying that Julian was being persecuted for his publishing. Anyone who thinks that Epstein committed suicide is naive. He is at real risk of assassination in custody. This isn't some paranoid fantasy.
He has an appeal.
It is what we've been calling Day X, because it is very likely going to be the final hearing for Julian. So it looks pretty dark.
If he is extradited, what do you fear will happen to Julian in the States? Who is Julian Assange, just for those who don't know, and your relation to him?
Well, Julian Assange is the most consequential publisher and journalist of our times. He's also the most significant and famous political prisoner in the world. Happens to be a political prisoner of the West. He is the founder and editor-in-chief for many years of WikiLeaks, an online media platform. He's Australian. He originally was a coder and a technologist, I think you can say broadly, but specifically his expertise is cryptography and security. And he has been held in high security prison here in London since the 11th of April 2019. And before that, he was under siege in the Ecuadorian embassy because he had been given political asylum, all in relation to what he published. And what he published was about the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the torture program during the Bush years, basically a catalog about the Bush wars and the war on terror, so-called.
And it was information, a lot of it about Guantanamo Bay, I think, and as you say, the torture. He didn't actually do the hacking, did he?
Well, no, not at all. He is a publisher. He received information from the source. In this case, it was Chelsea Manning. And in fact, she didn't hack anything either. She was an intelligence analyst for the US Army. She was based in Iraq at the time. And she was reading these field reports on a daily basis, and she had to produce analyses of these reports. And what she discovered was that this was record of how the war was unwinnable, killing thousands and thousands of civilians that the U.S. Army wasn't admitting to, that there was no direction to the war. And she became a whistleblower, and she looked for different media outlets to send the information to. She tried the New York Times, she tried the Washington Post, they turned her down, and then she turned to WikiLeaks, and WikiLeaks published. And it is the most significant scoop or series of scoops in journalistic history. There's no denying the impact and the significance, the public interest of these documents.
And is that the philosophical debate here? To what extent does the public have a right to know these things? And to what extent does the army have a right, or the military have a right, to keep these things secret so people aren't in harm's way?
I think it's been oversimplified into kind of to funnel the big discussion into this kind of false either or. Mm-hmm. There is no dispute about the importance of what was in these documents. It revealed war crimes. It revealed the torture policies. It revealed, the specific instances in which 15,000 civilians had been killed in Iraq, which the U.S. military claimed to never have records for. It revealed details about kill squads in Afghanistan. and so on and so forth. And when WikiLeaks published, together with the New York Times, the Guardian, El País, and so on, these documents, they were considered the most significant shift in how journalism was made. It basically ushered in a completely new era for journalism.
Julian Assange's unwavering pursuit of uncovering the truth and confronting the most oppressive elements of our society are qualities that anyone at any age can respect. Embracing even a fraction of that bravery doesn't have to lead to fleeing the country, though. It begins with fully understanding the realities of our world, and that's only possible if we can rely on credible sources of news and information. I use the app and website from Ground News, my sponsor today, to see news articles from both local and international sources, so I can easily compare headlines. They help you to think critically about the news you consume by providing context you can't get anywhere else. Take a look at this story about Julian Assange losing his US extradition challenge. With my Vantage subscription, I can see this story has been covered by more than 79 sources. But what's interesting is that Assange really is a topic that transcends political divides. 56% of sources covering Assange are centrist, and there's a smattering on both sides as well. If I scroll down, I can see every article about this topic and compare headlines. And beside every headline, there is a tag showing me the political bias, reliability, and ownership of the source. This headline on the left focused on the reaction of Brazil's left-wing president, while this right-leaning headline focused more on the freedom of press angle. We live in a world where news is constantly being thrown at us without any context. Ground News offers a smart, easy solution to make sure you're seeing the full picture. I really believe in their mission. You can go to ground.news/Andrew to check it out. And if you use my link, you'll get 30% off unlimited access to the Vantage subscription, which is what I use. When you subscribe, you not only support me, you're also supporting an independent platform trying to make the news more transparent.
Before WikiLeaks, there was the way journalists worked was through, text messaging and messaging their sources, which by then was easily traceable by the authorities. Julian understood how the internet works, how surveillance works, and was able to create a encrypted Dropbox where you could receive information from sources without knowing and having no way to know who those sources were. And that enabled very high quality sources to come forward. And there are always whistleblowers. I mean, there are institutions, there's corruption within institutions. There are the people who work there who, in many cases, disagree with what's going on inside these institutions, but can't afford to lose their job or whatever. And this technology enabled, for the first time, sources to be able to leak safely and anonymously. So that was a real shift. And Julian and WikiLeaks and all the partner organizations as well won the highest journalistic prizes for publishing this stuff. There was Julian, we just published something called the interactive map of, what's it called? Anyway, it's on julianassange.org. Check it out. It's got all the awards and honorary memberships and all this stuff that Julian has won as a result of his journalism. And it's unmatched by, I think, any journalist in the world. He's won the equivalent of the Pulitzer Prize in Australia, the Walkley Award for most outstanding contribution to journalism. So the U.S. Government at the time was extremely upset about these publications because it reopened the debate about the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. It exposed, for example, Hillary Clinton ordering her diplomats to get fingerprints and so on of ambassadors in the UN building in New York. It was very embarrassing stuff. And the spin that came from the Pentagon was that it put lives at risk. And that spin is a spin that has endured this whole time, even though it's been refuted and shown to be complete and utter nonsense again and again and again. The U.S., in fact, when it comes to trial, when it comes to court hearings and has to make statements under oath, it admits it hasn't found a single instance in which a person has come to harm as a result of the publications. But it's kind of a very broad brush to be able to say, oh, this is dangerous, and to give the message that information is dangerous and that the public has to be protected from information. Even if it's true, you're not entitled to the truth because we know better. That's the message. And it's also a way to distract from what's actually in the documents, actual crimes being committed, assassinations, innocent people being killed in their tens of thousands and so on, torture. It's a way to change the topic.
Yeah, Julian became the story rather than the embarrassment of horrible things that they had been exposed as doing. Before going further into the legality of everything, I want to ask about the personal side. So how did you what is your personal background and how did you come to meet Julian?
Well, you asked me in the beginning to say my relationship to him. Well, I'm his wife now. I started in 2011 as part of his legal team. I was brought in. He was already under house arrest at the time. I'm a Swedish speaker. I lived in Sweden for 7 years, went to school there. And so I was brought in while this sex case was going on in Sweden, which was dropped. He was never charged, etc. But I was brought in as a kind of a bridge to understanding both the legal aspects and the kind of social dynamic around this case, because it was a political case. It is a political case when it comes to Julian, of course, in every respect. And Julian was, as I said, under house arrest. The following year, he went into the Ecuadorian embassy, claimed asylum, received it. And eventually we became romantically involved in 2015. And he was in the embassy for 7 years. So it was a very, unusual circumstances to meet your partner and husband, but it also was it was a very intense space to be in, because Julian wasn't allowed out of the embassy. The embassy was only, it was an apartment in Knightsbridge, right next to Harrods. It's next to the Colombian embassy, so it's not even the whole floor. It's half of the floor. About 7 rooms, I think,
right,
or 8. And he wasn't allowed out of this space, and there was no outside. There's no garden or anything like that. It's it's a London apartment on the ground floor of a building next to Harrods, and that became the most surveilled place in the world, according to some reports. It was just surrounded by intelligence agencies of various countries, because Julian continued to publish, or WikiLeaks continued to publish while Julian was still in the embassy. And there was the position of the UK government was that if he stepped out, he would be arrested on behalf of the Swedes.
Yeah.
But then when the Swedes dropped the case in 2017 initially, because they dropped it 4 times, but the penultimate time that they dropped it in 2017, then they said, well, we're going to arrest you because even though the case no longer exists, or the preliminary investigation for which he was never charged doesn't exist, you failed to surrender, and so we'll arrest you anyway. And this is a clause in the Bail Act, which is rarely enforced. If it is, it's usually just a fine. But they were hell-bent on arresting him. And so what we learned afterwards, after his arrest, was that the U.S. had in fact put in an arrest warrant for him secretly. And of course, the British courts were aware of this. Publicly, UK authorities were saying, oh, it's all about a Bail Act arrest warrant. Privately, they were holding, they had in their possession a U.S. warrant that was issued in December 2017. So about a year and a half before his actual arrest.
Right.
And the British public was completely deceived, because there was this narrative going around that, oh, Julian's just paranoid. The U.S. doesn't want to arrest him. He's just, hiding in the embassy. There was even an article out in The Guardian saying the only thing that stops Assange from leaving the embassy is his pride. And this was in the middle of not just an arrest warrant issued by the U.S. Within the British court system, but also, we later found out, during the time that the CIA under Mike Pompeo was plotting to assassinate him.
Wow. Okay, that's a lot to take in. This is why this is such a captivating story, and also it just seems like an entire country, potentially the most powerful country in the world, has gone after, with all of their weight, one person for like over a decade now. The Swedish part that you spoke about, this was in relation to 2 Swedish women, I believe, who accused Julian of manipulating the condom or something during sexual acts, and then he was completely cleared of that. What did that feel like for you the moment he was cleared?
Well, I mean, let me go back a bit, because I always find that talking about the Swedish preliminary investigation is kind of a waste of time, because it takes time away from the actual case that which he is charged for, which is publishing. But the thing is that Julian was never charged, so he was never formally accused. It enabled both the Swedish prosecution and the UK authorities to treat him like a suspected criminal, but formally he was never a suspected criminal. He hadn't even reached the threshold of a charge. And once you understand that, you understand how extraordinarily dodgy the Swedish case was. Because imagine this. This was, as you said, a sex case. In fact, the text messages that were never publicly released, but were, they were, in a way, they were publicly released eventually, but they revealed that these 2 individuals, these Swedish women, according to their own text messages, were saying, oh, I don't want to accuse Julian of anything. The police want to get him. And of course, the context of this is that WikiLeaks had just published the Afghan war diaries and was about to publish the Iraq war logs and the diplomatic cables. And Julian was, doing press conferences all around the world with the world's press, maximum attention from the world's press, saying there's more coming. And at the time, The Atlantic reported, before he even went to Sweden, because he was there for a conference, that the US State Department was telling its allies to find a way to arrest him. And this was a week before he went to Sweden. And then he went to Sweden, and they issued an arrest warrant. He answered, he was interrogated once. They didn't do anything. He stayed in Sweden for 5 weeks. And then he said, can I go? I have work to do. They said, fine. The prosecutor said, fine, you can leave. He publishes the Iraq war logs, and then they issue an international arrest warrant, start the extradition proceedings, and so on. So from beginning to end, between 2010 when it was opened and 2019 when it finished for the 4th time, he was never formally charged. So he was never able to be formally cleared, because he was never formally charged, even though everyone acted like he was. So, the one thing I would say is that at least it revealed what the true game was all along when the Swedish preliminary investigation ended for good. Because there was no longer any denying that Julian was being persecuted for his publishing. And the US government under Donald Trump, which is the one that brought the charges, made this explicit. He is charged under the Espionage Act, 17 charges for receiving, possessing, and communicating information that he received from Chelsea Manning, the whistleblower.
And he has an appeal coming up in the next few weeks. What does that mean to you?
Well, an appeal sounds more promising than the real situation, which is, so Julian has been fighting extradition since 2019. He initially won because the UK courts agreed that if he's sent to the United States, he would be put under conditions that would drive him to commit suicide. And then after that, we found out about this Pompeo plot to assassinate him and so on. And it's really, frankly, astounding that the UK courts are still considering an extradition when you have very credible reports. In fact, they haven't been. They've basically been confirmed by Pompeo himself that the person facing extradition has been the victim of a murder plot by the country that's trying to extradite him. All right, so back to this hearing that's coming up. Yes, it's on the 20th and the 21st of February. It is what we've been calling Day X, because it is very likely going to be the final hearing for Julian. The High Court has refused permission to appeal. That's where things stand. So even though you have Amnesty International and, the Committee to Protect Journalists and the National Union of Journalists and every single human rights and press freedom organization you can think of, plus The Guardian and even The Telegraph and The Washington Post and New York Times editorializing, saying this case is a grave danger to press freedom. It is a global threat to press freedom, and it should be dropped, and he should be released, and all these things. In spite of all of this, how can you explain that the High Court doesn't even want to hear his appeal? I can't explain it. Well, I can. It's political. It's uncomfortable, and if this were a legal case, as we understand, the justice system should operate to serve legal and law enforcement purposes, not political purposes, then this case would never have been brought. Julian would not have spent a single day in prison. But this is where we are. So the High Court refused permission to appeal. There's still a final thing one can do, which is what we're doing now, which is to ask two separate High Court judges to review the decision, to saying they agree or disagree. If they disagree, that's the end of the road for the British appeals here. You can't go to the Supreme Court. That's it. Of course, we're hoping that this panel will see, will take the rational and the only right decision, which would be to reopen the case. But statistically, that's difficult. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I don't know what will happen next. Basically, he could be extradited within a matter of. Well, we don't know. Mm-hmm. It's a national security case. So in other cases, they've just extradited within a matter of hours from this country. Normally, it wouldn't be that. It would be weeks. But it's just so unpredictable when it comes to Julian. So it looks pretty dark, but the political support for Julian is huge. I mean, it's really a global movement. It's from across the political spectrum. Yeah. It's highly unusual in our times. Everything's so polarized. But I find that I'm I have support from every corner of politics, except perhaps the extreme center is a little bit difficult, but there are even supporters there. And in no other case do you have like the grassroots support, as well as, for example, the president of Brazil at the UN General Assembly calling for Julian's release and getting a spontaneous applause from the world's leaders. It's a case that is often used to talk about Western hypocrisy very effectively. It's also a case that is used by authoritarian governments to justify putting journalists and dissidents in prison. Well, let's talk about Assange. That's their answer when they're asked about journalists in prison or critics in prison and so on. They're like, it's impossible to defeat that argument, because the West has departed from its principles in this case so extremely.
If he is extradited, what do you fear will happen to Julian in the States?
Well, I don't think it's far-fetched to believe that he is at real risk of assassination in custody. Anyone who thinks that Epstein committed suicide is naive. And this is, in Julian's case, this is a case in which the Central Intelligence Agency was engaged in developing plans to kill Julian while he was inside the embassy. So it's not, this isn't some paranoid fantasy. There was a report that came out in October, I think, 2021, and it was written by 3 national security reporters in Washington. And these are not, WikiLeaks fans or anything like that. They're national security reporters with their intelligence agency sources who they keep sweet. These are not the type of people who let's just put it this way, that they're pretty critical of Julian and WikiLeaks. Although some of that might be performative because they want to keep their sources sweet. But they also understand the serious threat that the case against Julian poses to their own work, because they're dealing with classified information all the time. In fact, journalists working for all the major media, unless they're doing columns about social, what do they call them? Interest, social interest. No.
Well,
unless they're doing fashion or.
Oh yeah.
If they're actually reporting and doing serious reporting, then they're often reporting on information that the government doesn't want out there, and in some cases, which they might call national defense information. You open a newspaper and you have, an anonymous source in government saying something critical of government. That's classified information, So it happens all the time. So national security reporters are very acutely aware that the case against Julian sets a precedent that can put them in jail.
Wow.
And so these 3 national security reporters did a 7,000-piece investigation with over 30 sources, some anonymous, some are named, very senior people. And they said that during Pompeo's time as head of the CIA, this was under the Trump era, he was obsessed. He was obsessed with Julian and WikiLeaks, and in fact made several speeches about how he was going to bring WikiLeaks down. I mean, this is completely bizarre.
Yeah.
The CIA is vowing to take down a publisher. And so they were planting a lot of false stories with the media, including in this country, very embarrassingly for The Guardian and others, which were shown to be completely false. And also, as part of this attack on WikiLeaks and Julian, it wasn't just fabricating stories in the press, but also finding ways to kidnap. There were talks of renditioning him, and then there were talks of also assassinating him. And what's really extraordinary about Julian's story, Julian's case, rather, is how much it gives a window into the criminal and corrupt activities of these agencies. In addition to this report, there was also another front, let's say, which is in Spain. The Spanish security company that was working inside the embassy was moonlighting for the CIA. So they were employed by the Ecuadorian embassy to provide security, but then actually they were getting instructions and gathering intelligence for the U.S., for the Pompeo CIA, basically, via a third party called Las Vegas Sands, which was owned by, anyway, this is really in the weeds, but which was owned by Sheldon Adelson, Trump's biggest financial backer. Right. And so Las Vegas Sands was the client, but you look at Las Vegas Sands and it's has very close relationship with the CIA, including in Macau, and that's documented in court cases and so on. So anyway, the Spanish company was spying on Julian and his lawyers, his legal meetings, recording his privileged attorney-client privileged legal meetings where he was talking about his defense during a potential extradition battle and so on. I mean, just think of it. Like the country that's trying to extradite him is illegally recording his defense meetings with his defense attorneys inside an embassy, and plotting to assassinate him, right? And then after his arrest, several of the workers of the security company in Spain then went to El País, which is like the Times here in the UK, and they said, "Well, I was involved in a spying operation on Assange and his lawyers and his family, the baby that came in, and so on, and I want to tell my story." And then the police started investigating in Spain. They raided the headquarters of the security company and seized terabytes of footage, documents of the product of their spying operations. They have these legal meetings with Julian on tape. They have instructions saying, this is how you get a live feed, hide it from the Ecuadorian government, obtain a DNA sample of Stella's child.
Oh my God.
And, follow them and so on. It's all in being going to go to trial in Spain in probably this year. And that was the kind of operational implementation of the CIA operation against Julian and WikiLeaks. And you never get an insight like this. That's why it's so fascinating, even if you're like maybe not interested in the Iraq and Afghan wars. What this case and the persecution of Julian has revealed is just the lawlessness and the hypocrisy and
corruption.
Global corruption, and that when it comes to when you really come up against the interests of the certain sector of the state, the intelligence and security sector of the state, it will just break every law. It's not a rule of law when it comes to the intelligence and security sector. It's about breaking the law, and those sectors want to remain shrouded in mystery, and they don't want any powers of oversight. And this is a new development. I mean, this is the thing when we're talking about secrecy and classified documents and so on. This is a recent phenomenon. There always used to be a presumption that the public has a right to know. There was a presumption about openness, and if that openness was denied, that was a problem. And if it was denied, there was some kind of democratic oversight of that denial. And what we learned through the diplomatic cables, for example, was that during the Bush Wars, during the War on Terror, all sorts of mechanisms were developed to bypass oversight. So, for example, in Sweden, when it came to extraordinary rendition flights, so CIA flights that were stopping over in Sweden and Ireland and so on to refuel, having kidnapped individuals without any due process at all, to be tortured in prisons and so-called black sites in Afghanistan and Egypt and so on, that the European countries would like the government would have meetings with the US government behind closed doors without any parliamentary scrutiny, to avoid democratic process. And so secrecy can never be a end in itself. The problem is that there has the argument has developed as if the presumption has to be on secrecy.
Yeah.
But what happens, of course, is that governments overclassify, and if they have this tool and a presumption of secrecy, they will always seek to stick as much of their dealings inside that wall of secrecy.
Which is scary.
Which, of course, makes them even more corrupt and more untouchable.
Julian is the father of your children. He's your husband. And you speak of potential assassinations and extradition. Is that the word, extradition?
Yeah.
Yeah, extradition. How do you get through the day? How does it make you feel to even talk about this now?
It's a relief for me to be able to talk about it, because the worst period for me was when, well, it's worst in, maybe that's not right. The most alienating period was when there was a kind of hazing exercise when it came to Julian, that he was paranoid, they're not after him, there's nothing going on here, it's all in his head. And then we would see the harassment, the surveillance, all the acts of criminality and harassment against Julian and his extended network and family and so on. And there was no way of bridging that gap, because it was like it was like two parallel realities. And at least now, if I talk about the CIA plotting to assassinate Julian, although I had the sense that this was a real possibility while I was in the embassy, I couldn't prove it. But then since then, you've had, independent reports by some, 3 national security reporters in Washington with over 30 sources, in the CIA and National Security Council and so on. You have the security company in Spain with the whistleblowers saying, yeah, we were talking about poisoning him. And so everyone's kind of brought into the seriousness and the reality of what's going on.
So you feel vindicated in that sense, but also worried, I imagine.
Well, I feel that that the public is now confronted with the reality that of Julian's persecution, and all sorts of all sorts of indirections were introduced in order to confuse the public for a long time, because in a political case, you need political capital. That's why when you have a critic, when you have someone who has public support or whose voice matters, and it's an inconvenient voice, they go after your political capital. And that's what they did with Julian. And they couldn't impugn WikiLeaks because WikiLeaks has a 100% record of accuracy. It publishes original source documents, and it's never been a false document published, even though there have been many attempts to trick WikiLeaks into publishing fabricated documents. It's never happened because of a strict verification protocol. But they went after Julian's character for years, for a decade, before they actually finally arrested him. And this is the difficulty when you know someone close, when you have someone close to you who is a public figure and who is maligned and lied about and so on. It really, it's extremely disturbing because it's like your sense of reality is distorted, because you know that you want to say, you've been deceived, but you can't really have. How many of those conversations can you have?
Yeah, it must have been so difficult. And how is it for him? How he's now in Belmarsh prison, is he?
Yeah, he's been in Belmarsh for almost 5 years.
How is he day to day, and how often do you get to speak to him?
I get to speak to him daily, unless there's some problem with the phone. And
it must be hard to keep having things to talk about, because even between husband and wife, you have shared experiences typically. Oh, I went out and I did this and so on. Do you have that feeling of not wanting to say too much about if you've had a nice day or anything because he's having a difficult day?
Sometimes. I mean, he's in a single cell for 20, 22, 23 hours a day sometimes. Always more than 21. I mean, always more than 21 hours a day in the cell. So he's able to go to the yard for an hour, up to an hour a day. Sometimes he has visits where he's out of cell. But if he's out of cell, he might be in a holding cell for, an hour and a half with nothing to do, because they don't let him bring a book or a magazine or anything. So you just to sit there, and it's cold, and it's a horrible, horrible place to deny you your sense of humanity, of individuality, of worth. But Julian's a very resilient person, and it's been very difficult at times when the isolation has been very bad. For example, during COVID, I wasn't able to see him in person for 6 months. He couldn't see his lawyers either. And so it's been almost 5 years, and it's very bizarre to think of it in those terms, because for us, it's been a continuum from the embassy, and there have been difficult periods and more difficult periods. But we're part of each other's lives day to day, and we speak throughout the day. He can call, not in the middle of the night. There are certain hours that he can call, and the calls are only 10 minutes at a time. So it's very, very irritating when it cuts off, because you don't think about it, but when you're having a conversation with your partner or someone you know very well, a friend, 10 minutes in, it's great, and then it just cuts off, and then he has to wait a certain amount of time, and then he can call back. So, and this is completely arbitrary and cruel to interrupt your communication with your family in this way, and that it's been that way for years now. But he reads a lot. He has a typewriter now.
Okay.
It took him a year to get a computer, and the computer is issued by the Ministry of Justice, and it's just for him to be able to read the legal documents. This is a complex case, so it has thousands and thousands of legal documents, pages of documentation, and so on. And so the computer that they issued is a fancy PDF viewer. It has obviously no internet, no text editing software. Extremely bizarrely, why would you remove that? And then it has epoxy in the USB ports, and some of the keys are also glued down, and so on. But because he requested it, and then there was some letters from some of the journalist unions that he belongs to, they finally allowed him to have a typewriter. So he has a typewriter, and he's been using it, and that's helped. And so we're about less than a month away from this, what is likely to be the final hearing in his case. And we're focused on that and busy mobilizing as much as possible, and telling everyone to speak out and come and show their support.
How has this impacted upon your mental health?
Well, I don't know the full extent of it, and I'm very worried about Julian, and I think it's been very difficult at times, and because it's kind of a there's this great catastrophe looming if he's extradited. If he's extradited, Julian will lose his life. I don't think that he will survive it. And I have good reason to say that. And then there's kind of I can't believe that we're even here, that he has been in a prison for so long, that he's even in a prison. That's not what prisons are for.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think that I'll know in the longer term what the impact is. I've tried not to get too focused on how I'm feeling, and just try to, because I need all my efforts to be on trying to free Julian and trying to form alliances and get more people to understand what's at stake and what has happened here. Because the strategy has been to try to isolate Julian, to deceive the public, to pretend like this is something that just concerns him, whereas in reality, it is an attack on the public's right to know the truth and the most significant truths that we as a public can hope for. The foundations of, like what reality is, basically. If we can't agree on what reality is, what's happened, what the truth is, then how can we possibly, vote in an informed manner or push for a certain reform, or it's kind of formulating in policy ways, but it's much more fundamental than that. And there's a sense that there's kind of a war on truth in general, and a breakdown that's coming out of that I see it all as connected. That the kind of fragmentation of reality, it's kind of an effect on this denial of access to the truth.
Do you daydream about a time where he's out and with you and the kids and living a normal family-free life? And how can my viewers and I help to make that more realistic?
I think there's a hopeful aspect, which is that this case is completely absurd. It's a concoction. It's spurious. It's an aberration, really, because it's criminalizing journalism. That's what it's doing. It's criminalizing the truth. It's criminalizing the public's right to know, and so on. And so that means that that it's possible for it to. That means that it's extremely shaky and it has no legitimacy, and that Julian is this close to freedom. Public awareness is really important. I think Julian's case is fascinating. I'm not just saying it because he's my husband and because I want to free him. It's all I was telling you about, the CIA's murder plots and the whistleblowers in Spain, and then there's a court case and the Spanish police raiding the office of the security company, and hard drives with Julian's legal meetings and illegal spying and all this stuff. And so I'd say the most important thing is for people to follow this case and show up at the hearing if they can, if they're nearby, or if they can get there.
Where is it?
The hearing will be at the Royal Courts of Justice on the 20th and the 21st of February, starting at 8:30, both days. There will be a march after the second day to Downing Street, and it's about showing public support, that the public is disgusted with what is being done, that it's not just Julian that is being who is under attack and imprisoned, but it's actually what he represents, which is the public's access to information, to the truth. Follow me on social media. I'm on Instagram. I'm on X.
Stella Assange.
Stella_Assange on X. And read up. There's a lot of information out there about what I've been talking about. And
if he's not extradited, that's a success. But then does he remain in Belmarsh prison?
Well, he's in Belmarsh without conviction. He's not even charged in the UK.
This is mad.
It's completely mad. He's just being warehoused in the highest security prison in the land. And, I emphasize, for publishing the truth, for doing exactly what the journalists in big media organizations are doing on a daily basis. He's being made an example of in order to intimidate the press generally. And so if he loses, then either they'll extradite him or they'll keep him in that prison unless he gets bail. But the US is opposing bail, and so far the UK courts have sided with the United States, keeping him in prison. If he wins, he'll be released. Well, if he'll be released down the road. I mean, if he wins this round, that means there will be a full appeal. But you know, the UK isn't keeping him for any other reason than a US extradition request, for which there is no conviction. But there is this absurd Espionage Act case that they've brought for the first time ever against a publisher, and you know, it's just it's antithetical to what liberal democracies stand for. You can't have a true democracy if you don't have the freedom to publish.
At this point, I usually ask for a heretic you admire. You don't have to say Julian, but who is a heretic you admire?
Well, I was thinking about this. My favorite heretic, of course, is Julian. There's a heretic, an Australian journalist whose name is Wilfred Burchett, I think. Burchett. He was the one who revealed. So he was basically embedded with the Allied troops during the Second World War, and he was with the U.S. troops in Japan, and then the U.S. bombed Hiroshima, and there was an order to not go to Hiroshima, but he went anyway, in violation of this order, and he just went on his own. 30 days after Hiroshima, the Hiroshima bomb dropped, and he published. Well, he I think it was for a UK paper. He revealed the radiation fallout of the bomb, because up until that point there was a cover-up. And there was another guy, William Lawrence. He was working for the New York Times, and there's a New York Times front page saying no radiation in Hiroshima after bomb. And he was told to basically counter Wilfred Burchett, I think it is. Yeah. And he was also being...
I'll put in the description whichever one it was.
Yeah. And this New York Times reporter was also being paid by the War Department at the time, so he was kind of doing a dual function. But I think this kind of highlights that Julian's role as a kind of the journalist telling inconvenient truths that affect national security. This is nothing new. And you had the mainstream papers spinning the story, covering it up, getting instructions to play down the uncontrolled narrative. So it's not, nothing of this is new. But the tools that are being used to attack the independent journalist, the heretic, are a lot more sophisticated and severe. Julian's facing 175 years in the US for publishing, and he's not even American, he's Australian. He has nothing to do with the US except that he revealed their crimes.
Absolutely crazy. It's crazy. Well, look, I support you, and I hope that the viewers will support as well. Please do go and follow Stella. We'll put the links down below in the description. You can follow her and find out the exact information about how you can help Julian. Keep watching this channel. I'll put something else here. Hit the like button and keep watching.